I've learned the lesson that it is not the fastest skier who wins the race, but the fastest one amongst those who make it to the finish line. Survival matters more than performance over the long term. It's not that knowing about ergodicity makes life more complex. Life is already complex. Like regardless of whether, it's a bit like saying, oh, if you're telling me that there's going to be a turn in my race, you're making the race more complex. No, the turn will be there whether I tell you about it or not. Whether you know about it makes you more likely to survive it. And just knowing about it and being more able to survive it gives you an advantage. You were saying you don't have many advantages, but if you can manage your risks better than others, that's a massive advantage. The key criterion is this very simple principle. It's that you adjust how much you're betting on a single bet or in a single investment, depending on the odds of it succeeding. But it's still always only a relatively small fraction of your wealth. Why? Because it doesn't matter how good the odds are or how good are the payoffs, because if you lose all your money in a single bet or on 2 or 3 bets, then you are in a terrible situation, even if they were good bets.
Welcome to Me and the Marketing Goliath podcast. Today, I'm really excited because I have a very special guest from Turin, Italy, Luca Dellanna, who probably deserves a nickname as the king of ergodicity, because no one can define the term ergodicity better than he does without using any mathematical formulas for demonstration purposes. So welcome, Luca, to the podcast. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Kelvin, for having me.
Before we go into what in the world does ergodicity mean, Luca, can you tell me more about yourself?
My work life is divided between writing books and the rest I work as a management consultant on my own. So basically I help businesses to improve the way that people are trained, the way that talent is developed and retained within the organizations.
And I know you've written a lot of other books as well, besides ergodicity, such as Winning Long-Term Games, Reproducible Success Strategies to Achieve Your Life Goals. I think both of these books have been really eye-opening in the way that, in the lens of investing, it really helps you understand a lot of different biases when it comes to making life decisions. I really enjoy reading it, and it's a very short read, so I do recommend my audience to grab your books. I'm going to take a crack at defining what ergodicity means, but I think in a nutshell, for me, it's about how to avoid total loss. You wrote in your book that investing is non-ergodic, and the reason being is because there are so many different variables that can't be calculated probabilistic manner. In your book, you said a system is ergodic if for all its components, the lifetime outcome corresponds to the population outcome. I think even this sentence is quite difficult to define, so I'm going to let the expert define what ergodicity means. So Luca, can you take it away to help us understand what it means?
Yeah, so the trick is to start with an example rather than a definition. In fact, in the book, I only start defining ergodicity halfway through. And I used the example of the story of my cousin, who was an excellent skier since a very young age. He made it to the world championship for his age bracket. And then sadly, one leg injury after another, he had to quit professional skiing even before he reached 18 years old. And from him, I've learned the lesson that it is not the fastest skier who wins the race, but the fastest one amongst those who make it to the finish line. And this is not just to say the banal point that survival matters to performance, but it's to say that survival matters more than performance over the long term. And since this point can be a bit controversial, I make a numerical example, very simple, that drives the point. I'm asking the reader the question of, imagining that my cousin participates in a ski championship consisting of 10 races. And he's a very good skier, so he has a 20% chances of winning each race. But he also takes a lot of risks, and so he has a 20% chance of breaking his leg in each race. And the question is, how many races is he expected to win in a championship of 10 races? The naive answer is 2 races, because we think 10 races, 20% chances of winning each, 10 times 20% makes 2. However, if we crunch the numbers, we get to only 0.71 expected wins. And the reason is because if my cousin breaks his leg in the first race, not only he loses that race, but he also loses all the following ones. And this has incredible consequences for investors. Because, for example, if you invest $1,000 and the investment goes down 50%, not only you lost $500, but you also lost all the future gains that those $500 could have generated. Plus, if you're managing money for others, maybe you also lose clients, because if you lose 50% of their money, probably they will quit rather than waiting for the market to go up again. So what this means is that in plenty of contexts of life, you do not care so much about the average, but you care also about irreversibility. And when there is the possibility of irreversible losses, such as money that you lose and it's harder to recoup, clients that go away if you lose too much money, and so on, when there are irreversible losses, you cannot rely on averages. First, you need to eliminate the irreversible losses so that you can grab the averages and then they start to become meaningful. And of course, so what is ergodicity? So if there is the possibility of irreversible losses and therefore you cannot rely on averages, then we say that we are in a non-ergodic environment. If there are no irreversible losses and you can rely on averages, we are in an ergodic environment. And the thing is, in real life, there is no such thing as an ergodic environment. It only exists in thought experiments and research papers, but all of real life has the possibility of irreversible losses, and therefore we are in a non-ergodic environment.
It's incredible because after reading your book, it just makes investing, relationship, and essentially life much more complex. And there's a lot of variables, considerations. As an investor myself, you're constantly aware of what is your edge, what is your advantage that you have. Like if I were to self-inflict, I probably wouldn't have a lot of advantages, right? Because there's a lot of variances or variables that we have to consider. And luck, I think we'll talk about later on in the podcast, plays a huge part in terms of a person's success. So going back to a lot of biases that we talk about, one of which was often talked about in your book is survivorship bias, followed by hindsight bias. Why is understanding survivorship bias a big part of winning the long-term game?
Yeah, it's very important. But before that, I just wanted to make an addition to what you just said. It's not that knowing about ergodicity makes life more complex. Life is already complex. Like regardless of whether, it's a bit like saying, oh, if you're telling me that there's going to be a turn in my race, you're making the race more complex. No, the turn will be there whether I tell you about it or not. Whether you know about it makes you more likely to survive it. And just knowing about it and being more able to survive it gives you an advantage. You were saying you don't have many advantages, but if you can manage your risks better than others, that's a massive advantage. The problem is that it's not an advantage that you notice in the short term. You only notice it in the long term. And here we go back to survivorship bias. If you check about success in investing and in life over short time frames, you will see people who succeed both with good strategies and with bad strategies. Because in the short term, we can succeed with bad strategies. For example, if we think about a car race, if there is a car which doesn't have brakes, they will probably be lighter and therefore go even faster than you on the straight line. And if you measure performance only over the straight line, you might think that you're doing worse than them. Even worse, you might think that you need to switch from your good strategy, which is to have some brakes in your car, to the worst strategy of the other people. But then the turn and the brakes that look like they were dragging you down actually become a huge source of advantage. And this is something like a metaphor that I usually use with risk management, because people tell me like risk management will slow me down. And I am, no, risk management is just like brakes on a car. We put brakes on cars not to go slow, but to enable going fast. And the same thing is about good risk management. Good risk management is not burdensome. It's something that you spend a tiny part of your time on it, not a big part. But you spend it well, and it enables you to do more things more eagerly outside of that, knowing that you took care of the biggest risks. And so back to survivorship bias, the problem is that when you measure investing performance over 1-2 years, you see a lot of investors who have excessive risk and are getting ahead. Well, ideally, you would only measure performance over long time frames, at the very least over more than one cycle, or at least one market cycle. In real life, it's very hard to do because you want to know how you're doing now without having to wait 10 years. So what do? You think about risks. You think, is this person taking more risks than me? If the answer is yes, then you cannot really compare the strategies. And then the other question is the quantity of risk that they are taking likely to manifest negatively within their career or within the investment time horizon? And if the answer is yes, then you just cannot compare yourself. Like if you want to survive a market cycle, you need to only compare yourself with people using strategies that enable them to survive a market cycle. And then you ignore the other ones, knowing that they're going faster now, but after the cycle, you will be ahead.
You wrote in your book, to win long-term games, we should compare strategies over the long-term effectiveness and neglect the short-term ones. So how do we go about evaluate these strategies and to constantly have this awareness in life?
Yeah, so let me make an example with my Twitter account. I have a Twitter account and it's growing well, but it's not growing super fast. Why? Because my approach is that I write tweets to build trust. So I never exaggerate. I never write something like stupid, something that might be wrong in the future, and so on. Other accounts, they always exaggerate. They say things which might not be true and so on. And they are more sensational. As a result, they go faster than me now. But there will be a point in which they cannot grow, or they grow differently. Because, for example, my core job, I am a business consultant. So I want people to trust me, which means that to work with me, I need to build trust. What some other accounts do is that they consume trust to gain engagement. They say the thing which is sensational, and maybe more people share, more people like it, but they will trust the account less. And so maybe the account grows faster in terms of followers and of engagement, but those people, even if they are higher number, they would be less likely to engage with them at a higher level. The point that I'm passing is that success, however you measure it, can be achieved in a high quality way or in a low quality way. When you achieve success in a low quality way, you're meeting your numbers, but you're meeting them using tactics that destroy trust, that maybe destroy your health, destroy your energy, and so on, and make it harder to attain subsequent goals. And instead, high quality success is success that is achieved in a way that makes achieving future subsequent goal easier. And so the big question that you should have at the back of your mind, that if you want to succeed over the long term, is, am I succeeding building trust or consuming trust? Am I succeeding building relationships or destroying relationships? Am I succeeding building my health or destroying my health? And so on.
In your book, you highlighted how do we evaluate long-term strategies, and there are three components. First, the long-term strategy or the long-term success must be sustainable. It must be constructive, and that it must strive towards inevitability. So, like you said, if you don't have health, you can't carry on and compound those small gains in life. So it was really profound when I thought of these like important properties. I think it's a combination of going back to survivorship bias and delayed gratification. Maybe you can tie it up much better than I do, but I think comparing is a huge component when it comes to survivorship bias. I think an example would be if I were to compare my success with someone else's success, let's say, for example, with the Olympics happening right now, everyone wants to win a gold medal, but nobody evaluates what that exceptional athlete has to go through to win that gold medal. And once you understand their sacrifices, their constraints, I probably wouldn't want to trade positions with them. And I think that's the craziest part of survivorship bias. In investing, if I were to, let's say, trade places with someone who has 30% year on year return on investment, but then they have to play a high stakes game in terms of leverage and margin, I probably wouldn't want to take that risk because there's always a chance of total loss or irreversible loss. So can you tell me more about this concept and why it's so integral and so important? And it sort of goes later on in terms of, you did disagree on delaying gratification, but delaying gratification has nothing to do with playing the long-term game, but more to do with delaying comparison. So I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so let's begin with this last part about delaying gratification, because I wrote this book, Winning Long-Term Games, and the common comment that I get from people who read the title but didn't read the book yet is, look, I don't really want to play long-term games. I do not want to delay gratification. And then I'm like, you got it the other way around, because if you want to succeed as fast as possible, you only have bad ways to do it. And let me explain what I mean with that. If you want to succeed as fast as possible, it means that you need to see every relationship as transactional to get the most out of that relationship. And to be honest, that makes all the relationships difficult to enjoy. Whereas if you play the long-term game, you get the time to build relationships that matter, to build relationships beyond the transactionality, and you enjoy them more. So that's a way in which actually playing long-term game enables gratification. Another way is, if I want to succeed as fast as possible, it means that I need to work a crazy amount of hours, maybe to the point that I will not be able to enjoy my work. Maybe it means that I need to do things which are unethical, which means that I will not be able to sleep well at night. Maybe it means that I need to overpromise to customers, which means that either I will feel guilty or not very happy, or anyway, I will not enjoy the sales process so much. Whereas if you do embrace the long-term games, the long-term nature enables you to work in a way which is actually fulfilling and gratifying. So that's why I'm saying that actually playing the long-term game enables gratification. What delays is comparison. Because if you play the long-term games, it means that you need to accept that today, the next year, the next 2 years, probably your friends and colleagues will look like they are more successful than you. And you just need to accept that, knowing that the tables will very soon turn. Since I understand that this is a concept that some people might get, but then not really believe, I address it in a more numerical way to bring a very good example. And the reason why it's so hard to understand this concept that the long-term game can be better is because we have this belief. So one is because we have this belief that to get the most out of the year, we need to get the most out of each day. But this is wrong, because if you try to get the most out of each day, you will not take those actions which bring no immediate return, but are necessary to grow beyond a certain point over the year. And this could be both in life with things such as going into a deeper relationship with your partner and so on, but also in the business world, going into deeper relationships with your clients and with some key stakeholders, building some skills so that you really understand what you're doing and you have fewer blind spots and so on. But now, back at the numerical example, which I promised. In the book, I make this example in which I'm comparing two strategies. And I'm making the example about two entrepreneurs. I call the first one Alice and the second one Bob. And Alice takes more risks and wants to succeed faster. So she has a higher growth rate, but also takes more risks. And Bob, instead, is satisfied with a lower growth rate with lower risk. Now, I don't remember exactly the numbers, but in the book, I put the numbers, I draw the chart, and I show how, in the medium term, Alice gets ahead. But then in the long term, Bob gets ahead. Why? Because the risk that Alice starts taking starts compounding. What does it mean? I make the example with lying. Imagine that you lie and you have a 1% chance of getting caught. That means that you have a 99% chance of getting away. So it sounds like a fantastic strategy. And if you lie, for example, to your customers to sell, you will start selling more. However, if you lie every week, once every week, you have a 99.5% chance of getting discovered over 5 years. But this is something that the probabilities only start compounding over the long term. So that's why in the short term, Alice looks like she's getting ahead, and then in the long term, Bob wins. But then it gets crazier. Instead of having only one Alice and only one Bob, imagine that you have a few thousand Alices and a few thousand Bobs. And then what happens is that if you look at the wealthiest entrepreneur, it would be an Alice. Because there would be one Alice that took extreme risks and got lucky enough so that she didn't have to pay the consequences. So the wealthiest person will be an Alice. In fact, the top few percent will all be Alices. However, if you compute the total amount of wealth of Alices and the total amount of wealth of Bobs, Bob has the highest average wealth. So what does it mean for you? It means that at the society level, the winner will be an Alice. But the chances that if you adopt Alice's strategies, you end up a winner are extremely thin. And since you are only one person, and you cannot rely on the law of large numbers for you at the strategy level, for a single person, Bob's strategy is way, way better.
Yeah, I think that was really astounding, which was presented very well in your book. I think a lot of people would see Warren Buffett as an Alice because of his returns. But if you were to implement the same strategy in the modern day society, it probably wouldn't work as effectively during the times when all the variables were in his favor. I think in the media and the news, we see a lot of Alices a lot because Alices get portrayed with a shinier spotlight. I think that is the dangers of comparing, is we always compare with someone who is way better than us or someone who's worse off than us. And it goes back to hindsight bias that we as an individual have to go through more often than we think. So how do we resist ourselves from comparing with others who are smarter than us or someone who is less smart than us? And if there's a way to do it, how should we go about it?
Well, there are two things to do. Like, one consideration is your environment. Like, you know how they say that you become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with? That also applies to time preference. And if you spend all your time meeting people who want to succeed as fast as possible and they take an excessive amount of risk, or basically if you surround yourself with Alices, it will be very hard to implement a Bob strategy. And instead, it will help a lot if you surround yourself with Bobs. This is one consideration. And then the other consideration is simply think about those examples. Like, until I ran the example of Alice and Bob with numbers, like, I wasn't really believing it. And then you run it, and then you start seeing it all around you, and you understand just how important and just how pervasive this phenomenon is.
It's really good that you explained it in that way, because from reading your book, there is a way to sort of mitigate that. And one way is to sort of learn from other people's mistakes, and obviously learning from your own. But learning from others people's mistakes requires a high level of self-awareness. And you need to compare yourselves with someone who has failed, but failed in the way that they have the same intelligence as you. And how do we measure intelligence? Like, for example, if I were to, let's say, run a successful business because I've seen someone do it, what kind of advice would you give to that person if that person were to run like, for example, e-commerce business? I'm sure you, as a management advisor, this is sort of your job, is to help them build self-awareness and to make logical and practical decisions.
Yeah, by chance, I was talking about this with one of my clients on Monday that actually runs an e-commerce business. And we had exactly this conversation, which was the importance of understanding how others failed. Like, if he doesn't have a clear understanding of how other e-commerce business failed, he puts himself at risk of doing the same failure. Now, the trick is that very often we think, yes, I know that there are a lot of other people in this business who failed, but they are dumb. And I am smart. And therefore, I will not commit the same error. When the problem is that, well, certainly there were a few of the failures which were indeed made by dumb people. Plenty of failures were actually made by people who looked very smart until the moment they failed. And so you don't know whether you are very smart in the sense of business smart, or whether you are overvaluing yourself just because you got lucky so far, and just because you played against amateurs until the time being. And so for me, it's about abandoning any assumptions about my intelligence and the intelligence of others, and just asking myself, what are the most common reasons that e-commerce businesses fail in our example? And then maybe I come up with the top 5 reasons, and then I plan how I can mitigate those reasons and avoid the same mistakes. And then again, I ask myself the question, for e-commerces that did everything as per my strategy, are there still that failed? And if yes, what happened? And that's an incredibly clarifying exercise, which, by the way, comparing to the exercise in which you're just learning from your own failure, it enables you to prevent your own failures so that you can learn before you fail and you have an actual chance at avoiding your own failure.
I'm sure, Luca, you make investments all the time in terms of your time. So I'm curious to get your thoughts, because I asked my speaker this question, which is very important. What does investing mean to you?
Investment means deciding how you allocate your resources, which can be money, but can also be time, in a way that maximize outcome. But the key thing in which I differ with others, like up until now, I gave you kind of a textbook definition. What I disagree with others is the definition of outcome. Like for me, like you can maximize 2 things when you invest. One is that you maximize the expected average outcome of your investment. And the other one is that you maximize the number of parallel worlds in the future in which you are satisfied with your investment. To explain what's this difference, I make an example of a discussion I had some time ago with a person that works in startups and quite works for a startup that might become extremely successful. And the problem is, or like the good thing for him, I guess, is that most of his wealth right now is in stock options into the company he works. And the point is that, like he was saying something along the lines of, people are telling me I should diversify, but there is no other investment I know of that has a higher expected return than my stock option. And the reasoning I was instead suggesting is that this might very well be true. However, imagine that you are working for a startup that has a 50% chance of becoming the next Google. and the 50% chances of failure. If you look at the average expected outcome, it means that you have the average expected outcome of becoming a multimillionaire, maybe even a trillion. However, if you look at it in distribution of outcomes, you have a 50% chance of being extremely happy and a 50% chance of being sad. Whereas if you take, 30%, 50% of your stock options and you invest them into a diversified fund, for example, yes, you bring down a lot to your average expected wealth, but you also bring up a lot the percentage of futures in which you're happy. In fact, you can buy yourself a 100% chance of being a multimillionaire. And I'm like, that should be your objective, at least in my opinion, at least that for how I reason. And for me, that's the difference. That's what I always try to maximize, is the percentage of chances that I have of being happy.
That's very great. And I'm so glad that I was able to ask you that question because I almost forgot. But I think it's really interesting because you study ergodicity, you teach it. I couldn't help but ask you this because I feel like everyone's definition of investing is very different. And like you said, you measure it by happiness. There is a threshold to be a multi-billionaire or a billionaire, but in the expense of unhappiness is probably not worth it. So I wanted to quickly go into the Kelly Criterion. I think while I read your book and understand Kelly Criterion, it's quite interesting because it's also a way of de-risking and not to go all in on a particular investment while making sizable bets that are not too big. So what is the approach when it comes to life and investing, given that, as we mentioned, life, investing, relationships are all non-ergodic? How can we understand the Kelly Criterion and apply it to life so that we don't take too much risk in life?
Yeah, so the Kelly Criterion is this very simple principle it has a formula behind, but the principle is simple. It's that you adjust how much you're betting on a single bet or in a single investment, depending on the odds of it succeeding, but it's still always only a relatively small fraction of your wealth. Why? Because it doesn't matter how good the odds are, or how good are the payoffs, because if you lose all your money in a single bet or on 2 or 3 bets, then you are in a terrible situation, even if they were good bets. Now, this is the first half of the chapter on the Kelly Criterion. The Kelly Criterion is used in sport to do a lot of sport betting. If you talk to anyone who's been in sport betting for a while and have been successful, but over the long term, so that they're not reckless people, they will all tell you that the Kelly Criterion is too aggressive. And that's despite there being a wealth of research papers and so on saying that the Kelly Criterion is optimal. What's the difference? The difference is that when you would do the mathematical demonstration that the Kelly Criterion is optimal, you're putting values to the variables without an uncertainty. Like, you think that your odds of winning a bet are 50%, and you put 50% in the formula. However, in real life, there is uncertainty over those variables. When you think you have a 50% chance of winning the bet, actually, you don't know whether the chances are really 50%. Maybe they're 30, maybe they're 60. You don't know. And therefore, once you take into account this uncertainty, the Kelly Criterion becomes suboptimal. And what's more optimal is you take the Kelly Criterion and you apply an arbitrary fraction of it. Like some people, they say, I take what the Kelly Criterion tells me, I divide it by 4, and that's what I'm going to bet. Why am I saying this? It's because every time we use formulas or whatever in our investment strategies, we need to remember that those values that we put in those formulas, they come with an uncertainty, even when it doesn't look like. Because when it looks like, I don't know, even just the price of a stock in this moment. If I open Bloomberg and I see that the stock is valued, I don't know, $120, it looks like it's an exact number. There is some uncertainty in that. Meaning that in a 100 parallel world, the price of the investment with the same information today Would it be a bit higher? Would it be a bit lower? Why? Maybe in one universe, a market participant was about to enter the order on the Bloomberg terminal and some coffee spilled on it and they didn't enter the order and that affected the price. And because you have all this uncertainty that we don't put in the formulas because we pretend that it doesn't exist, what means is that our models suggest us a level of risk which is optimal if the uncertainty is not there, and it's suboptimal in the real world where you actually have this uncertainty. And this is just another applications of these reflections for the Kelly criterion.
I think there was a chapter that before the Kelly criterion in your book, Winning Long-Term Games, is essentially to also evaluate the emotions of a person. And it was really interesting because you explained why moody people tend to be more efficient than moodless ones. But I think a lot of people would think that without showing emotions is probably beneficial when it comes to investing. It's very opposing in a way. And I was wondering if you could explain that concept to us and whether it's a positive trait when it comes to investing in the stock market.
So let's begin with the big caveat that excesses are always bad. So I'm definitely not saying in any way that being excessively enthusiastic or excessively depressed or anything are good, because they very obviously are not. What I'm discussing there is whether a modicum of emotion is actually beneficial or not. I'm bringing an argument that actually modicum of emotion is beneficial. Why? I make this example, which actually is not my example. I'm citing a research paper that now I cannot cite by mind, but in the book there is the actual citation, in which there is this example with hunter-gatherers. I think that the researcher uses another example, but imagine that you have two hunter-gatherers. Let's call them Alice and Bob. And Alice is moody. She can get excited, depressed, and so on. And Bob instead doesn't feel any emotion. And they collect food by collecting berries that are hiding under the bushes. And the question is, who gets more berries at the end of the day? Is it Alice or is it Bob? And in this case, it's Alice, the winner, the one that feels smooth. Why? So of course, this is a completely different person than Alice and Bob from the previous thought experiment. The reason is because Bob, who doesn't feel any emotion, will check every single bush, both the bushes that have berries and those that don't have berries, because he cannot know until he goes under the bush and checks. Conversely, Alice, maybe she checks the first bush, there is no berries. Second bush, no berries. She gets demoralized. And so she doesn't check the third bush. She walks a little bit until the next bush. And then she finds some berries. And then she gets excited. And then she checks all the bushes nearby. And the thing is, in the real world, when the bushes are not homogeneously presenting the same amount of berries, but in the real world, you have some bushes with an area with less berries and another areas with more berries. In that case, it pays to have a little bit of emotion that prevents you from wasting your time when the rewards are low and pushes you to spend more of your time and energy where the rewards are high. Then again, excesses are always bad, because if you get so excited that you bet too much of your time or of your wealth, for the reason we saw earlier, it's going to end up poorly. But you still do not want to act as purely as if everything was homogeneous, as if everything worked as an arbitrarily simple formula, and so on.
Having some sort of healthy dosage of emotions might be beneficial, because I can't imagine, for example, being in a relationship where you have no emotions at all and how much it would affect your partner not having any emotions. Having a healthy dosage is probably a way to increase your chance of success while being able to de-risk so that you don't take extreme risk in life. I sort of want to go to the section of luck because it's such an important topic, because I feel like a lot of people don't know how to evaluate luck. And sometimes combined with a person's success, a person may mistaken luck for success. There's always a constant debate. Warren Buffett, Howard Marks, these incredible investors have touched on this. They credit their success, partly luck, because luck plays a huge part in our life in terms of where we're born, what kind of resources we already have. So having that awareness is actually very important. So how do you sort of teach luck, and how do you educate people to distinguish what luck is and not success?
Yeah, so I make two examples. One which has to do with Elon Musk, but before that, I make another one which has to do with well, now we can talk about the Olympics since the Olympics are happening as we speak. And imagine that there is a soccer game, let's say Brazil against Italy, and Brazil wins 5-0 against Italy. And my question is, how much of these goals were due to luck and how much were due to skill? Now, obviously, all of the goals were due to skill because, like, of course, all the players had to be extremely skillful. They had to train for very long, and that's how they got to score goals. And if I had gone there in the Olympics, I would absolutely have scored 0 goals, even if I got lucky. That doesn't mean that luck also didn't play a big part. How? Why? Because maybe in this game, Brazil won 5-0, but then maybe we will play the same game with the same teams and they only won 1-0. And that means that there was a certain luck component that made 5 goals instead of 1. So first of all, we noticed this thing that saying that there was luck doesn't take anything away from the skill. And even if you are very skilled, a lot of your outcome will still depend on luck. So this is the first principle. But how can we quantify this? Well, we can have the teams playing a lot against each other. So let's say that we have Italy playing 10 times against Brazil, and the average result is that Brazil wins 2-0 against Italy. That means that 2 goals of the 5 goals of the last match, 2 were due to skill, and 3 were the variance, 3 was due to luck. Okay. So usually people, they follow me when I talk about this because we all know, especially if we played soccer, we all know that skill is necessary, but luck plays a huge role. Now, let's go back to Elon Musk. At the time at which I published the book, Elon Musk was the wealthiest person in the world, and he had, I think, 273 billion or something like that. Huge wealth. And I'm asking the question of how much of his wealth is due to skill and how much is due to luck. And of course, Elon Musk is extremely talented entrepreneur. However, let's apply the same process that we did for the soccer game. Imagine 10 parallel worlds in which Elon Musk has the same upbringing until 18 years old, same initial conditions, same skills and drive, and then the paths, they start to diverge. Since Elon Musk is very skilled, very determined and everything, he will probably be successful in all 10 parallel worlds. He will probably become a millionaire or even a billionaire in all the 10 worlds. However, how wealthy will he be? Maybe in some worlds he will only have a few billions. Maybe in some he gets very successful and he has 50 billions. Maybe in others he only has 100 millions and so on. Thanks to his skill, he's successful in all of those. However, the average wealth is only, let's say, 27 billions, which is still extremely, extremely good. There is only a handful of people who have more than 27 billion. But what does it tell us? If the average wealth of Elon Musk over 10 parallel worlds is 27 billions, and in the current world is 270 billions, it means that 90% of his wealth is due to luck. Again, without anything of it taking away from his extreme skill. So that gives us a kind of framework about just noticing how luck-dependent outcomes are, even if they were driven by skill. And And again, the more someone uses Alice's strategy, the more the variance there will be. And so the more we will have this impression that they succeeded just because of their skill, whereas luck has a big impact without taking anything away from their success.
Mhm. A follow-up question to that, I think a lot of people would ask after your explanation is, how do we increase our luck, given that luck does play a significant part in terms of a person's success?
There are three types of luck that you might want to increase. One is the type of luck that only looks like luck, but actually you can very, very much influence. For example, if I go to 100 conferences this year, I can guarantee that there will be a few luck encounters. But wasn't really luck, like the fact that I went to some conferences, that I exposed myself to that luck, I exposed myself to it to a degree that made the chances of having a successful outcome almost 100%. So that's a kind of luck. Then you have another kind of luck, which is pure skill. Like if you take the best basketball player in the world and they make 95% of baskets, that's not luck, that's skill. Even though it might look like luck, because if I'm trying to get to 95%, I need to have a lot of luck. And then you have the type of luck, which is actual luck, which is you make a bet and you only have a limited control over it, and the rest is due to luck. Some kind of investments in which the distribution of outcomes is something like 60% very successful, 40% failure. You can increase your odds in those cases by making your due diligence, by preempting failure, by buying insurance, and so on. But there is a certain type of percentage of luck that you can really not influence. And I think that through life, you need to navigate all the types. So you need to build skills. You need to expose yourself to lucky situations in a way in which you make luck, in which you expose yourself often enough that it's almost guaranteed that you will get something lucky out of it. And then the third thing is know that no matter how much you do, there will be still some luck component, and you need to take into account of it and make sure that you will have a good outcome, even though you go through bad luck.
I really enjoy this conversation because I think luck is such a complex topic and it's not easy to break it down to three different types of luck. I think not a lot of people have done that. Going back to de-risking, and I read through both of your books, and there's a topic that you touched on, which was having mixed emotions is probably not a good idea because it affects your chances of success. But at the same time, there's also one way to de-risk is not to put all your eggs in one basket. The example that you gave is like, if you're really passionate about something, but you're not sure of it, make sure that you allocate enough time that you pursue this and you also pursue a side project so that not all your projects would go into failure. So how do we overcome mixed feelings? Because I can make an assumption that a lot of people are going through with this mixed emotions with their jobs, their careers, relationships. What kind of advice would you give them to overcome this sensation of being in the middle?
Well, so for me, like those mixed emotions very often come from a lack of clarity about what you really value and not. And an exercise which I find extremely clarifying is the following one. You take a sheet of paper and you write down what you believe that are your values. And by values, I mean it could be something like money, family, health. If you, for example, really like, I don't know, playing basketball, it could be playing basketball. That could be like one of your values, like everything that's important, that's important. This is the first step. The second step is that you order them. You try to order them from the one you think is the most important to the one you think is the least important. Until now, very banal exercise. That's not where the value lies. The value lies in the third step. The third step is that you take your schedule for the past week and you look at all the moments in which you spent your time with, all the decisions in which you ended up spending your time one way or another. And you need to reorder that list that you created so that it explains how you spent your time last week. Let me make an example. Imagine that I said that playing basketball for me was more important than money. But then I looked at my schedule last week and I noticed that I actually skipped one basketball practice because I work. That means that I should go back to my ordered list and I should put money on top of basketball. And now it gets really tricky because you will notice some things about some values that you put very high on your list, but you discover that it's an aspiration and it's not a reality. Because if it were reality, you wouldn't have spent your last week the way you spent it. And so the objective is to reorder the list, making sure that this is not the aspirational list. So it shouldn't be something you are proud or you feel shamed about it. It's just the list of your current values as per today. Doing this exercise will take us 20 minutes. It will feel very bad, or at least it didn't feel super nice to me because I discovered a few things about myself. But once you do it, it will be extremely clarifying because you will discover that those are your values. And usually, the reason why you feel some mixed feelings about some decision in your life is because there is a discrepancy between your aspirational list of values and your actual list of values. And then, of course, you can take the decisions you want, which usually are something like, yeah, maybe I want to make one or two changes, but I should also respect my current values right now, even if they are not what I aspire to, and blah, 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 blah. But it's a very, very clear.
I definitely need to try out that exercise this week, see whether there's any discrepancy. I'm sure there are a couple, but that's a really great exercise that you recommended. So, Luca, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. It's been really insightful, and you've used so many different examples to explain ergodicity, as well as how do we increase our chances of success. I do want to wrap up this podcast with a question that I always ask my guest speaker is, what's the biggest investing mistake they've ever made? And what did my guest speaker learn from it?
Yeah, so the biggest investment mistake I made, which is interesting, is probably like I invested more than I should have invested in put for a company that I thought had a significant chances of having problems. And the thing which is interesting is that I was 100% right that the company had problems, as it was further revealed. One thing is whether the company really had problems, and another thing is what the stock price did about it. And what happened is that the stock price didn't actually go down as much as I thought it would, and I lost money because of it. And my learning about it, so one was about the size of the bet. That was very long time ago, and I still didn't know about this idea of the Kelly Criterion, and especially of the fact that the Kelly Criterion gives you a correct estimate, but in an ideal world in which the variables you put are correct and in which the stock price actually follows the value of the bet. Whereas in the real world, one, you have uncertainty on the variables, and two, it might happen that you are very correct on the company and yet the stock price does something else. So I've learned to make a bit of these distinctions, which we usually group together.